Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Ram.
Hare Hare.
Okay, looks like we're ready to get started.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for joining ISKCON of New Jersey's Zoom Sangha. Today it is our distinct pleasure to welcome His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu. He will be giving his third lecture on this platform on the trilogy series of times of crisis. And today the focus is going to be service to Krishna in the times of crisis. Now, for those of you who missed the last few sessions, I'll just do a brief introduction. If I did the full introduction, it'll take 2 hours. That'll not be very good. But His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu is a distinguished scholar, notable Vaishnava academician, and he's also a head of department and the chairman of the religious studies at the Utah State University. He's the author of an academic book by the name of The Chaitanya Vaishnava Vedanta of Jiva Goswami, and he's also co-author of the Bhagavad Purana Sacred Text and Living Tradition. And he's also authored a number of other books. He's one of the youngest students to have graduated from Oxford University with a PhD. And he graduated from the University of Utah in Boise with the highest distinction that they offered the students at a very young age, the Boise State University. At the age of 13, he enrolled in university, and just a few years later, he left it with a degree in philosophy and a bachelor's degree in mathematics. So and this is all, he credits that to his wonderful upbringing. He was homeschooled by his illustrious parents, Mother Arudha, and who spent a lot of time and energy homeschooling him and his brother. And of course, he's a lifelong devotee, dedicated his life to Krishna consciousness from birth practically, and he's a disciple of His Holiness Hanumat Preshaka Swami. He was also selected by the Hindu groups to represent Hinduism when the Pope visited the United States, and that was a big source of pride for us. In fact, let me see if I have a picture of that. I'm gonna share that picture. I just really like it. Let's see, here you go. Share screen. So that is Radhika Raman Prabhu meeting Pope Benedict a few years ago. I think it was like 2007 or something. Let me just unmute him. Radhika Raman Prabhu, please unmute yourself, or I think I'm trying to unmute you. Let's see if that works.
Yeah. Yes.
So tell us about this meeting. I'm going to put you on the spot.
So Hare Krishna, everyone, and thank you, Madan Gopal Prabhu, for that very kind introduction. So yeah, this picture, just in case it's not clear to anyone, I'm the one on the left. And on the right is the Pope with the white hat. And it was actually quite an amazing experience. It was set up by His Grace Anuttama Prabhu, who invited me for this opportunity. And it was really, well, okay, this is what happened. The Pope, we were at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and the Pope came in his famous Pope Mobile onto the grounds. And when he arrived, there was a whole row of cardinals just to my left. So there was a row of cardinals, and then who are next in line after the Pope. And then it was myself and a row of other younger type people from different faith communities. So it was an interfaith service. And he came down the row and shook hands with each of the cardinals because they're kind of like his peers. And when he came to the end of that line, there was this moment of hesitation I could see in him. Should I continue or should I stop? And just in a split second, I thought, oh, why not? This is going to be my one and only chance. So I stuck my hand out, and he shook he shook my hand, and of course he had to do that with everyone else if he did it with me. So it got everyone an opportunity to shake hands with him, and then we each went up one by one to give him a gift on behalf of our tradition. And at that time, Anuttama Prabhu and I had discussed, okay, what should I say when I'll have a moment with him, and we should make it count. And so we discussed it, and what I ended up saying in the end was that, Holy Father, Hare Krishna, and I tried to say that Hare Krishna clearly so he recognized what tradition I was from. And he looked up and he was happy, and I said, Hinduism has a very strong monotheistic tradition. And I hope that monotheism can be the basis for a ongoing dialogue between the Vaishnav tradition and Catholicism. And he responded by saying, yes, I hope that dialogue continues to grow and strengthen as well, something like that. But it was actually a very powerful experience. I mean, I have to say that, Krishna doesn't put people in positions like that without giving them significant Shakti, that they are qualified in many ways. And it was quite, as a Vaishnava, it was quite a moving experience for me to meet the Pope. And I know Pope Benedict had a reputation of being very intense and very heavy, unlike the current Pope. But when I met him, he wasn't like that at all. He was actually quite humble in his demeanor, and he made it a point to step off of his pedestal and meet everyone as equals, and really personal in his dealings. So there was clearly some Shakti there, and I appreciated it very much in terms of that meeting, as well as the opportunity to represent ISKCON to the Pope.
And that's wonderful. You're absolutely right. Krishna does not put people in important positions or important situations unless empowering them with Shakti. And so certainly he put you in that position, to represent ISKCON and Hinduism as a whole. So it was a really moment of pride for us as ISKCON devotees and Hindus as well. So we're very grateful that, Krishna put you there, and there's a reason why he put you there. You said the perfect right thing. So once again, we'd like to welcome you for this nice Sunday evening for a Sunday feast. We don't have any prasadam that we can offer right now, but may your own greatness and glory be your own prasadam reward.
Thank you so much. My humble obeisances to all the devotees who are present there, particularly His Holiness Jayadvaita Maharaj, Mother Rukmini, and others, senior devotees who are present here. So yes, as Madan Gopal Prabhu said, this is the final part in a 3-part series on crisis. The first one was faith in a time of crisis. The second one was prayer in a time of crisis. And this third and final one is on service in a time of crisis. And the first two were more internal, and I wanted to make this one we can think together about more external physical activities, not external in a sense that it's superficial, but physical activities is how do we serve, and particularly the question of service to humanity. I know this is kind of a question that has a lot of different aspects to it within our tradition, and it's just something that I've been thinking a lot about during this time, and I thought it would be nice if we could think it through together. It's certainly relevant. The New York Times has recently reported that there's over 200 million people around the world, if not more, who are suffering from hunger as a result of having lost their jobs or the economic struggles that they're going through. Something like 17% of children in the United States are suffering from hunger, and not to mention all the millions of people who have lost their jobs and are struggling in various ways. And of course, the health aspects of it aren't over yet. So I thought this is relevant as kind of a final installment of it. So I wanted to start with a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. This is from the story of Vritrasura. It's the battle So it's actually, the chapter title is The Battle Between the Demigods and Vritrasura. It's Canto 6, Chapter 10. And I wanted to read texts 8 and 9. This is part of a conversation between the demigods and Dadichi Muni. The demigods have asked Dadichi for his bones, that is his physical body, that is his life in this present body, because they want to use his bones to create a weapon to kill Vritrasura upon the Lord's direction. And Dadichi Muni has initially told them no, because like, who would really want to die? I don't want to give my bones to you to use, but then he was only saying that in jest. In reality, he's a very selfless soul. And at this point in these two verses, actually there's several, but in these two verses I want to read, he expresses his desire to offer service to other living entities. So I'll read 8 and 9 and then the purport to text 9, okay? So this is Canto 6, Chapter 10, texts 8 and 9. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 8. Yo dhruvena atmana natha na dharmam na yasha puman iheta bhuta dayaya na sashochya stavarairapi. Translation, well, the purport we won't read here, but translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. O demigods, one who has no compassion for humanity in its suffering and does not sacrifice his impermanent body for the higher causes of religious principles or eternal glory is certainly pitied even by the immovable beings. I'll read it again. O demigods, one who has no compassion for humanity in its suffering and does not sacrifice his impermanent body for the higher causes of religious principles or eternal glory is certainly pitied even by the immovable beings. And then text number 9, for which we will read the purport. Etavan avyayo dharma punya shlokairupasitaha yo bhuta shoka harshabhyam atma shochati hrishyati. Translation: if one is unhappy to see the distress of other living beings and happy to see their happiness, his religious principles are appreciated as imperishable by exalted persons who are considered pious and benevolent. Again, the translation: if one is unhappy to see the distress of other living beings and happy to see their happiness, his religious principles are appreciated as imperishable by exalted persons who are considered pious and benevolent. Purport: one generally follows different types of religious principles or performs various occupational duties according to the body given to him by the modes of material nature. In this verse, however, real religious principles are explained. Everyone should be unhappy to see others in distress and happy to see others happy. Atmavat sarva bhuteshu. One should feel the happiness and distress of others as his own. It is on this basis that the Buddhist religious principle of nonviolence, ahimsa parama dharma, is established. We feel pain when someone disturbs us, and therefore we should not inflict pain upon other living beings. Lord Buddha's mission was to stop unnecessary animal killing, and therefore he preached that the greatest religious principle is nonviolence. One cannot continue killing animals and at the same time be a religious man. That is the greatest hypocrisy. Jesus Christ said, "Do not kill," but hypocrites nevertheless maintain thousands of slaughterhouses while posing as Christians. Such hypocrisy is condemned in this verse. One should be happy to see others happy, and one should be unhappy to see others unhappy. This is the principle to be followed. Unfortunately, at the present moment, so-called philanthropists and humanitarians advocate the happiness of humanity at the cost of the lives of poor animals. That is not recommended herein. This verse clearly says that one should be compassionate to all living entities. Regardless of whether human, animal, tree, or plant, All living entities are sons of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvayonishu Kaunteya Murtaya Sambhavantiya Tasam Brahma Mahadyonir Aham Bija Pradapita. It should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving father. The different forms of these living entities are only their external dresses. Every living being is actually a spirit soul, a part and parcel of God. Therefore, one should not favor only one kind of living being. A Vaishnava sees all living entities as part and parcel of God. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shunichaiva Shvapakecha Pandita Samadarshinaha. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater, outcast. Brahma bhuta prasannatma nashochati nakangshati samasarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labhate param. One who is transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. A Vaishnava, therefore, is truly a perfect person because he laments to see others unhappy and feels joy at seeing others happy. A Vaishnava is para dukkha dukhi. He is always unhappy to see the conditioned souls in an unhappy state of materialism. Therefore, a Vaishnava is always busy preaching Krishna consciousness throughout the world. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, the question I want to address today is one that's come up many times in discussions with devotees in the past. And it basically goes like this. What is the role of humanitarian or philanthropic work in the life of a devotee? There are those who argue that philanthropic work, as in helping people physically, materially satisfy their needs, is something that is unnecessary for a devotee, even pointless, because it's taking care of temporary, limited material needs. And our goal is to take care of their eternal spiritual needs. And such persons who make this argument will give the example of what Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita, where in the 2nd chapter, where he talks about how it is useless to save the clothing of a drowning man. Right? This material body is like our clothing, and the spirit soul is the person. And if someone's drowning and we just take their clothes and save those clothes from drowning, then we have not done them any good. And then on the other side, there are devotees who argue in the opposite direction and say, yes, while it is most important to give people spiritual knowledge by which they can end their material condition, at the same time, it is helpful, if not important, if not essential, to help them materially as well, physically, to give them the opportunity to live relatively comfortable lives, because otherwise, how are they going to be able to pursue their Krishna consciousness peacefully? And for this, they point to the example of Srila Prabhupada in Mayapur, that famous story where he was standing on the roof of one of the buildings, and he saw a child fighting for scraps of food with a dog, and it broke his heart so much. He felt so distressed to see that suffering, and it's at that point that he asked that all ISKCON centers, that no one should go hungry within a 10-mile radius, I think, of any ISKCON center. So there's this tension, I guess, within our tradition of the question of, well, what exactly is the usefulness, and to what extent are we as devotees meant to engage in humanitarian or philanthropic work? A lot or a little, or if we have time for it? Is it something that is urgent, or is it better to focus exclusively on our activities of preaching Krishna consciousness and giving people spiritual knowledge? So how do we resolve that? How do we think through that tension? So first of all, I want to think about what Srila Prabhupada has to say about humanitarian and philanthropic work. If we look at his writings as a whole, then there's several consistent themes that he brings up in regard to criticisms of humanitarian work. And one of these, he says, is that such work is temporary, that it doesn't address the real issue at heart. That yes, we can feed someone today, but they'll be hungry again tomorrow. We can help them get over disease, but in the end, the real disease is our material body. And it's the suffering that we have to undergo as a result of our bondage in this material world. And giving them a path to make our way back to Godhead, to free ourselves from material attachments, that is really the key to helping others, right? That's true welfare work. That's true humanitarian work. So that's one important point that he makes. And then the other criticism that he gives very frequently is that humanitarian work or philanthropic work, although externally seeming to be about other people, is too often about oneself, that it is still selfish in nature, right? That it's still directed about my own name and fame and glory and my own position and well-being and all of that. And so it's not actually as selfless as it seems, because again, it's still focused on the body, and therefore those who are related to the body, well, those are the people I would benefit. And these two criticisms, there are a couple of others that we'll discuss later, but these two criticisms are very, very reasonable and very significant from multiple perspectives. And I think any thoughtful philanthropist would recognize the truth behind these criticisms. Just recently, I was, on the first one, on the point of the temporariness of the humanitarian work. Just recently, I read an article by the president of the Ford Foundation that looks after the arm of the Ford Foundation that works on philanthropy, and in Time magazine. And this gentleman was writing that how, during these times we really need to step up and do our bit to help people. Although, and he made a very interesting point, that our capacity to do philanthropy is a result of the very same issues that we actually need to solve, right? So his point was the significant income inequality that we find in American society and around the world, which allows one person to be so grossly rich and other people to be so dirt poor. That very income inequality, that very strong distinction is exactly what allows one person to give millions of dollars in charity to others, right? So he said, we are the symptom, the result of the very problem that we're trying to solve. And so, and I think many people recognize that we end up in these cycles of trying to help and then having a new problem come up, or we stamp out disease, one disease and another arises. That aspect is, I think, very clear and sometimes frustrating to people who are engaged in philanthropic work. As far as the second criticism goes about how it's often selfish and still not as altruistic as it seems to be at first, it's a fact that people tend to give in charity primarily to their own circles, right? So someone who graduates in a very privileged way from Harvard University, from a privileged family, tends to donate for a new position at Harvard University. And so philanthropic work often ends up being in circles that are connected to oneself, right? And Srila Prabhupada makes this very clear that ultimately, if we're doing philanthropy based on my physical body and therefore those related to the body, that it cannot be truly altruistic. It cannot truly be for the benefit of the other. It's still selfish in some capacity. Whether that selfishness manifests for desire of name and fame, or because of tax deductions, or for any other reason, or the fact that my own community is benefited. So if you think about it like this, we've got, say a person is only interested in taking care of their own selves, like they're totally focused on themselves. We find such people detestable and we call them narcissists, and they're just about themselves. But if that same person, instead of just worrying about themselves, decides to take care of their families, to work hard and take care of their children and their husband or wife and their parents, we consider them to be very good people, a good man, we would say, someone very generous. And if we expand after that and we say, okay, not just my family, but how about my neighborhood? Then yes, that person is more generous and broader, but it's still my neighborhood, right? It's still a circle that's made around me. What if we were to go further and say beyond the neighborhood, how about my state or my community or even my country? The circle gets bigger and bigger. But as Srila Prabhupada points out, that's still nationalism. It's still a form of selfishness. What if we say forget nations and say all of humanity? I embrace all of humanity because they're humans. And that's still centered on the fact that I'm a human. And Prabhupada, as he's pointing out in this purport that we read, that excludes other living entities, particularly animals, who also suffer and who also need our compassion and our care. The point is that we can build that circle broader and broader and broader. Each time we make the circle bigger and bigger. The problem is who's still at the center of that circle. It's me, right? It's still me who's at the center, no matter how big I draw that circle. And so long as it's still me, it's going to be selfish. And so the only difference that happens is we get from me fighting with you to my neighborhood fighting with yours, because we both don't want that homeless shelter in our backyard. Or it becomes my country fighting against yours, or sometimes it's even one block of countries fighting against another, or perhaps one special interest group fighting against another special interest group. And Prabhupada has this line in a purport in the 4th canto where he says, such humanitarian work only leads to chaos. Why? Because ultimately no one has the ability to be broad enough without the recognition that Krishna is at the center, right? Only Krishna, he says, has the ability to be the friend of all living entities. And so he gives frequently the example of the tree and watering the root of the tree, or feeding the stomach. And in this way, the hands and legs and everything else get fed as well. So these are two key points that Srila Prabhupada makes again and again in his purports and his lectures. And there's a lot of strength to these points in terms of, I think, amongst followers of Srila Prabhupada, of course, but even amongst those who are thoughtful, reasonable people engaged in such work. I think they recognize the limitations of the philanthropic work they do. And so as devotees then, we have to think through of, okay, when we help others, in what way do we help them? How is it different, right? And why should we engage in that type of philanthropic work? If we keep these two things in mind and don't fall into the trap of helping only the temporary situation and not making it focused exclusively on us, that is, we do it in the mode of goodness, genuinely without desire for reward, there are very, very important reasons for why it is that devotees should be engaging, that we should feel not only free, but impelled to be, why we should be moved by the suffering of other living entities and help them not just on the spiritual level, but together with that to also help them in terms of their material needs and necessities. And I want to go through a few reasons, actually 4 reasons in particular, that should drive us in that direction towards service, based on our own philosophy, based on Srimad Bhagavatam in our tradition. The first is one that Srila Prabhupada has mentioned here already in this purport, that a devotee is paradukha dukhi, one who is unhappy to see the suffering of others. And again, Prabhupada quotes the example of many different devotees like Jesus Christ and Vasudev Datta and Haridas Thakur as people who had that kind of mercy and compassion towards seeing the suffering of other living entities and recognizing that if we want to help them, then we have to see to it that their condition is such that we will, that they will not, that they will be able to actually work and serve Krishna because their physical situation is okay enough. Sometimes people say, well, you know, the material world is a place of suffering anyway, right? It's, Krishna says, dukhalayam ashashvatam. It's a place of misery. So there's no real point in trying to relieve that misery which is going to be there anyway. And that's true. The material world is definitely a place of suffering, and that's never going to go away. But the fact is that here we are on this boat trying to cross the ocean of material existence and suffering. And our boat, Krishna tells us, is always going to be half-baked, right? It always has holes in it, and we're bailing out water and we're trying to keep it afloat, and we're struggling in terms of trying to catch the wind in the right way. But we have to keep the boat running. If we can't keep the boat running, then we're never going to make it to the other side. St. Francis of Assisi said very wonderfully that our bodies are like a donkey that we ride through this world. And yes, it's only a donkey, but we can't make it through this world unless we take care of our donkey, right? And of course, the donkeys of others as well. So in that capacity, a devotee's heart reaches out for suffering. Think about why, for example, we ask people to become vegetarians. It is true that Krishna likes vegetarian food, and that's what he asks us to offer him. But we also tell people to be vegetarians because it helps relieve the suffering of animals, right? Their physical, personal suffering, the pain that they go through. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is speaking about in this purport, ahimsa paramo dharma. He says this is a basic condition of a devotee's nature. In one lecture I was listening to recently, Prabhupada speaking on the 5th canto, Lord Rishabhdev's instructions, and he talks about very wonderfully how, Arjun, he didn't want to fight in this battle because he had the compassionate heart of a Vaishnava. And when he saw that Krishna was insisting, he decided, okay, I must do it even though I don't want to. But at first, one must have that heart of a Vaishnava and not want to do it. In other words, one cannot expect to be a Vaishnava if we have no qualms whatsoever in terms of giving pain to others. No, we don't want to, we cannot. If we have that compassionate heart, okay, and then Krishna wanted Arjuna to fight, fine. He bit his lip and he decided, I'm going to do it because I have to surrender to the Lord. But that was not his initial desire. And Prabhupada says, this is the heart. This is the nature of a Vaishnava. He says this in the 2nd chapter of the Gita as well. Right, so that element of paradukha dukhi, where a devotee is not able to see that suffering of others and is moved to take care of it. Yes, the physical suffering is less than the ultimate existential suffering that we go through as a result of being stuck in the material world. But there's nothing that stops us from doing both, right? From taking care of both. If we refuse to help on the physical level, on the material level, it would be like a neurosurgeon who sees someone on the street in need of CPR and says, no, I don't do CPR. I only do the ultimate medical work, which is I'm a neurosurgeon, and that's what I do, right? I only do brain surgeries, not this basic, simple stuff. Well, okay, yes, you do the ultimate medical procedures. I mean, you're a neurosurgeon, that's the best. But this man here needs CPR, and every doctor is trained in CPR. So give him CPR, right? So as devotees, yes, we're trained to do the ultimate welfare work. But when someone is needing something much more basic and material, then, and we have the capacity to give, then there's nothing that should hold us back, because as Prabhupada is saying, a devotee is para dukkha dukhi. The second thing is that the mode of goodness is a wonderful springboard for Krishna consciousness. In so many areas, we try to be in the mode of goodness, right? Like I've been saying about vegetarianism, and we encourage people, even if they don't want to be devotees, to be vegetarians. We ask people to rise early in the morning because it's just good. Being in the mode of goodness helps us to focus on devotional things and lead us, gives us the opportunity. It clears the way for us to practice Krishna consciousness. So the mode of goodness is a good place to be. And humanitarian work done with proper intention of not having personal benefit, according to Deshe, Kale, and Patre, Krishna says in the Gita, according to place and time and the proper recipient. This is mode of goodness, and it's very good for us. In fact, Krishna says in the Gita that this is our duty, right? He says, Karyam eva tat, you must do this. What? Yajna, dana, and tapa. That charity, sacrifice, and austerity, tapa. These are things that natyajam should never be given up, even by the great souls. He says, matamuttamam, this is my final opinion. This is my conclusion on this matter. In fact, what's so interesting is that this debate that we often have about the role of humanitarian work in a tradition that values the ultimate over the material, what's interesting is that Krishna identifies this debate in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, specifically, he says, some people say that these things are useless in the ultimate sense, and other people say that they must be done. So he identifies the very tension that we're talking about today, right? That some people say we should, and some people say we don't need to. And then he decides, no, my opinion, matamuttama, my final resolution of the matter is that karyameva, they must be done. Natyajam, they should never be given up. Why? Because they purify us even as we do it. It's our duty. And for grihastas in particular, right? For grihastas, I think that role of engaging the ashram of the grihasta is such that we are asked to take broader responsibility for society, to move beyond the immediate realm of who we know or what we're doing for our own benefit or for the benefit of others, but to really take broader responsibility in society, socially speaking, because it's the grihasta that then looks after the support and the maintenance of the various other sections of society. And so especially for householders, it's crucial that we engage in that type of work. In fact, when we try to renounce it, then we end up being a tad hypocritical because we put in so much effort for our own, taking very good care of our own material needs and necessities to make sure that we're, decently, comfortably situated. And yet, if we consider ourselves to be too advanced to worry about those physical needs of others, then that ends up being hypocrisy, right? If we are sannyasis and we truly have given up our engagement in terms of maintenance of this material body and our involvement in terms of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, if we've truly given that up, okay, then our focus can be 100% not on the more temporary humanitarian work, but on the ultimate welfare work. But to the extent that we're still engaged in this material world, if we're taking, then we have to give, right? We have to take responsibility at the same time. And Prabhupada, in the purport to this, these verses in the 18th chapter of the Gita, where Krishna says, these must be performed, Karyamevata, 18.5, Prabhupada says, he specifically gives this, excuse me, he specifically gives this example of sannyasi and marriages. He says, a sannyasi, of course, is supposed to have nothing to do with the opposite sex and particularly marriages. But when it comes to general society, then Prabhupada says that a sannyasi should not discourage a young man from getting married if that is indeed what is best for that person in terms of this is where they're at, and therefore they need to accept it and practice Krishna consciousness in that position, right? So the same can be said for the work that we do as grihastas, more broadly speaking, in terms of taking responsibility for society and humanitarian work and so on. Finally, I want to mention that at the beginning of the class, I set up something of a false dichotomy because I set it up as an either or kind of situation, right? So should we focus on the spiritual and the ultimate welfare work, or should we help people in a temporal, physical, material way by looking at their physical needs, their health and their wealth and their all of that? This is really a false dichotomy, right? It's an opposition that doesn't hold true. In fact, there's no reason that one cannot do both. In fact, it is natural that we end up doing both. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's the example of Murari Gupta, who's a doctor, and Chaitanya Lila, and Mahaprabhu says that the wonderful thing about Murari Gupta is that he cures his patients both materially and spiritually, right? And these things, they come together very naturally. Prabhupada makes it very clear in one of his other criticisms of humanitarian work. He says that service to humanity is not service to God, because that's confusing the part for the whole, right? Service to humanity is one aspect of the Lord's creation. It's not God in his completeness. And the result of that is when we try to serve humanity and we say this section of human beings is serving God, then we end up, as Prabhupada is saying in this purport, leaving behind other sections of society or leaving behind animals. So he rejects the idea that service to humanity is service to God, that Jan Seva, Janardhan Seva, or Manav Seva, Madhav Seva, or Daridra Narayan. But he emphatically states again and again that service to God includes service to humanity, right? That if one is a devotee, then one is driven to serve others through this process of para upakar, of giving them their ultimate good. And he gives the example of watering the tree, right? That automatically, because Krishna contains everyone and everything, automatically a devotee is drawn to help others in their life, and helping them physically or materially is usually a very, very important part of helping them spiritually. There are very, very few people in this world, only the most advanced devotees, who can completely ignore their material physical situation and be simply ecstatic in their Krishna consciousness. That certainly can be done because devotional service is not dependent on any material circumstance, but it's a very rare thing. People like Kolavecha Sridhar and others like that. For the vast majority of people, there's a close relationship between these two things, between their swadharma and their parodharma, between their immediate physical needs and their spiritual needs. Because after all, we are all involved in this world, and one cannot be separated from the other. And when we reach out to someone on a material level, then we end up also being able to help them. We have an opportunity to help them spiritually. It's just like, before someone has a disease of some kind that they need surgery, before they can do the surgery, they can go for surgery, the doctor needs to reduce the inflammation and reduce the level of pain that goes with that inflammation. And so ibuprofen doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the issue for which the surgery needs to be done. It's only symptomatic relief. But until that symptomatic relief happens, there's no doing the surgery, right? Unless we reduce people's inflammation, when the material suffering is so intense, it's so great, it's so obvious, that it's very difficult for anyone, including myself, to direct our attention to that which is ultimate or that which is spiritual. So sometimes we say, oh, these things are only symptomatic, right? If we feed someone today, they'll be hungry tomorrow. Sure, that's true, but symptomatic relief is closely connected to ultimate relief. These two things are not separated at all. In fact, in my experience, when I teach world religions at the university, different religious traditions, and we do a kind of a whole survey. And then I also teach courses particularly on Hinduism. And I've noticed again and again how my students, when they're assessing the quality and the viability of any tradition, they want to see what effect it has in a down-to-earth way, right? In fact, there's two things particularly that they look at again and again about a tradition. They say, what will this tradition do to help us fix our environmental condition that we're in, number one? What we're doing to the environment, what we're doing to the earth, how does it help that? It's a great idea and it's a great philosophy, but is it actually going to change the situation we're at in the world? And secondly, how does it help bring about more social justice? How does it bring about more equality and more good relationships between people, right? And we know that Krishna consciousness has the capacity to do that. In fact, putting Krishna in the center, putting God in the center is the only way that we can bring those relationships between people, bring that justice that we're looking for in the world. But people want to see it in action. They want to see, yes, the philosophy is good, but what effect does it have in our day-to-day lives? What effect does it have on improving the situation of the world? I recently took a group of my students on study abroad to Govardhan Eco Village. And they were so overwhelmed, so impressed by the practical impact of Krishna consciousness as seen in the lives of devotees, in the innovative technologies that they were coming up to take care of the earth, the philosophy as it supported Mother Nature, as it supported the communities, the village communities around the eco-village, how Krishna consciousness provided a full package for living life well in this world, with the ultimate goal of going back home, back to Godhead, right? Again, these things are not mutually exclusive. They're actually one and the same thing if we see it in the right perspective. If we try to help people separate it from Krishna, okay, that's not going to take us very far. It's well-intentioned, but it's not going to be effective for the reasons that we talked about in the long run. But once we see everything in relationship to Krishna, then there's actually no difference, right? It's not only a false dichotomy, it's exactly the same thing. Helping people spiritually and helping people materially are identical because one solves the other. A devotee's heart helps in both ways, in both capacities at the same time. Okay, so these are some reasons, I think, theologically, that we want to be driven, that there's an imperative to be of service to people in whatever way that service is most needed, right? In whatever capacity, never separating the spiritual from the material. Now, a few objections that someone might raise to the points that I've brought up here. One possible objection is that there are so many humanitarian organizations, but there are very, very few people or institutions that are helping people on the spiritual level. And so we have to focus our energies on the spiritual and let others do the humanitarian work. Why should we, quote unquote, waste our time in something that, you know, the average person can do, or so many people can do? And well, two things. One is that this creates that false dichotomy that I was talking about earlier, as if a devotee can't both be a neurosurgeon and give CPR at the same time, as needed in the circumstance. Sometimes people don't need neurosurgery. They need CPR first, and then they can go get the bigger surgery that they need. So it creates this false dichotomy, the objection itself. But then we've already talked about that. The other thing that it raises, this question of, okay, is yes, it may have been true in the past, right? When ISKCON was a small band of dedicated devotees living in ashrams, mostly brahmacharis, some sannyasis, and a few grihasthas also living within the ashram, that yes, we needed to really focus on bringing about that. And we didn't have time, or we didn't have energy, or we didn't have the expertise to help in other ways. But that's not the case anymore. ISKCON, from what I hear, has over 1 million members around the world. We have hundreds and hundreds of doctors and lawyers and pujaris and devotees in every profession, right? And we are going to engage with the world. We already are doing so. What better way for those hundreds of doctors to serve than to use their medical abilities to help others physically, and like Murari Gupta, also spiritually? What better way than to get together and do something like a Bhaktivedanta hospital when we're going to work anyway as professionals in the world, right? Now that choice isn't a real choice anymore. That in ISKCON's current situation, there's more devotees who are not obviously devotees because they're involved in like average people in the world, then there are people living in the ashrams. And so really we are a society engaged with the world, and we should embrace that. We already are. There's so many wonderful, amazing devotees who are helping out in these times of pandemic, sacrificing, really taking on great risks as doctors and as teachers and but we shouldn't have to do that in addition to being a devotee. We should embrace that. We should recognize that this is what it means to be a devotee, that I can help someone recover from whatever it is they have and be there as a devotee in front of them and give them the solace that they need when they're all alone in that hospital room because not even their relatives are allowed to visit them. Who is there but that devotee by their side, who is also their doctor, right? That's not a choice anymore. We shouldn't have to think of it as something I do on the side because I need to maintain my material body. No, our swadharma and our parodharma, our individual duty and our ultimate duty, are separate things so long as we have not become Krishna conscious. When we become Krishna conscious, we recognize they are identical. And this was Arjuna's revelation in the Bhagavad Gita, right? For him, it was a choice. Should I do my ultimate dharma or should I do my individual dharma? And he comes to recognize through Krishna's mercy, no, it's actually exactly the same thing. That my job as a king, as a ruler, as a kshatriya is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing to serve Krishna as well, right? And when that bipolar aspect of our personality disappears and we end up becoming whole again, right? That is the position of someone who's Krishna conscious, that it's not a choice anymore. I am a devotee in whatever I do. I am helping people materially in whatever I do, and I'm helping people spiritually in whatever I do, because this is the heart of a Vaishnav, right? This is the nature of a Vaishnav. Another objection was something that I've addressed already, which is the material world is a place of suffering anyway. So what difference is it going to make? And the response to that simply is that it does make a difference, right? It does not take away the suffering of the material world. It doesn't make it into a beautiful, wonderful, rosy place. That we're assured will never happen. But the fact that our philosophy tells us that the material world is always going to be a place of misery is actually something that should empower us to do more. And here's why. One of the biggest challenges that people who work in humanitarian areas or ecological areas, in socially engaged areas, one of the biggest challenges that they say that they have is the fact of feeling so hopeless and depressed, because the world's problems come faster than we can deal with them. The diseases multiply faster than we can find vaccines for. People become hungry faster than we can feed them. The world is a place that always overwhelms us. And when we start off with the assumption that this world is supposed to be a beautiful place, it's bound to make us depressed and hopeless. Actually, Krishna's point that this material world is dukhalayam ashashvatam, it's temporary and miserable, is actually something that gives us freedom, that gives us hope, that says, look, I'm not going to be able to keep up with this all. It will overwhelm me at some point or another. It's going to overwhelm me, but that's okay. What I need to do is do my best to keep the boat afloat, because this human body is a very valuable boat, but which I can use to cross this ocean of material existence. And so long as we're floating and we're moving, it's okay. It's good, right? So I need to work hard to make sure we all get across together, as Prahlad Maharaj says so beautifully in his prayers, the compassion with which he speaks about those who are suffering in this material world, the compassion with which Srila Prabhupada speaks in his wonderful prayers on the Jaladuta, right? That I need to bring all these souls together with me to the other shore of this ocean of material existence. That's the foundation of our philosophy, is relieving others of their suffering. And for that purpose, we need to keep this boat afloat as well. This boat of this material body, the boat of this society, we need to keep it afloat as well. Right? So it's very much not the case that because this material world is a place of suffering, therefore it gives us the license to just sit back, relax, and say, well, everyone's going to be in misery and who really cares? It's quite the opposite, actually. It gives us a sense of, it gives us a realistic idea of what we can accomplish without having this false sense imposed upon us that somehow this world is supposed to be a perfect and beautiful place. And why isn't it? Oh my, right? And then the final objection that I want to raise is that of karma, which, sometimes people explain their apathy by saying that anyway, it's people's karma. And so they should, so really it's not my fault and it's not my responsibility, right? This is due to their past deeds, their past actions. This is possibly the worst use of the idea of karma because it destroys compassion. The very heart of a Vaishnava is compassion. It's what moves us. It's what drives us. It's what drove Srila Prabhupada to risk his life to come to the West at such an advanced age. And for us to say, well, it's just people's karma, it weakens, if not destroys, that idea of compassion. Karma is not a punishment from God. It's just the way the world works, right? It's the way the world is set up. In the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, in the 1st chapter, when the question is raised by Parikshit Maharaj, why is the Lord partial, or is the Lord partial to the demigods, because he kills the demons and protects them? And Shukadeva Goswami's first answer is wonderful. He says, Krishna is not partial because This is just the system of the material world. There are three modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And each one brings different results. If you act in this particular way, you're going to get this particular result. Essentially, this is the system. It's not personal. Krishna is not personally hating the demons or personally liking the demigods. Krishna does get personal with his devotees, but when it comes to the average working of the material world in the realm of karma, this is not a personal thing for Krishna. He's set up a system, and you can plug into the system how you want, and you're going to get a certain reaction for it. Karma is just the nature of the system. Karma is Krishna's job. To help people through that karma, that's our job. When we take our job and we try to use karma to justify what we are or are not doing, right? That's just that person's karma, they're suffering, or we tell someone it's your karma, you tolerate it. We're essentially usurping Krishna's position. The living entity does not set up the law of karma, just as we don't set up the law of gravity, and we don't set up the law of mechanics. We don't set up any of these. We're subject to them. But when we take karma and we say, it's your karma that you're suffering, we're essentially taking Krishna's position and saying, I'm the lawmaker, and therefore I can wield the law to use it to my advantage, to justify my actions or not. No, only Krishna can do that. Only Krishna has the ability to tell someone, yes, this is your karma. Because I've set up the system, Krishna can say, but not us. We are subject to the system. And that means while it's Krishna's job to dole out karma, it's our job to help people through it. Just like, take the law of gravity, right? If someone's working on their roof and they step up, they take a step too far back and they fall to the ground. Or let's make it even more foolish, right? Someone says, I'm going to jump and see what happens. I think I can do this. And they jump to the ground and they break a leg. When they get to the doctor's office, the fact that their fall was a result of their own misdeeds or their own foolishness or their own lack of knowledge does not prevent the doctor from fixing the fracture, right? The doctor doesn't say, well, didn't you know about the law of gravity? And why should I help you? I mean, you deserve this. Anyone who jumps off a roof, frankly, you deserve it. Well, that may be true. It may be 100% true, but that's not the doctor's job, right? The doctor's role is to say, whatever may be the cause of your suffering, it's my role to cure you, to help you through it. So using karma to justify our actions or to point to explain another's actions is taking karma into our own hands, and it's a misuse of the doctrine of karma. When in fact, karma is something we should use to throw up our hands and say, no, this is, whatever is happening, I don't know. Gahana karmano gati, right? The law of karma is too complicated, Krishna says. It's impossible to understand practically. Let me do what I can. Because one of the most effective ways of getting bad karma is to use karma to justify another's suffering and to be callous towards them. When in fact, our job is to be that person who tells the guy working on his roof, look, you're going to step off your roof, please stop, right? That's our role, right? Not to explain why they fell in the first place. I guess the last thing I want to then ask, to raise, is how do we serve, right? I hope I've explained well enough that as devotees, there is no separation between serving someone's spiritual needs and serving someone's material needs, that these two things are actually the same in the life and the mind and the heart of a devotee. So how do we go about service to others in a practical sense? And what makes a devotee's service to others different than the average humanitarian or philanthropist? Or maybe not the average, but at least the type that Prabhupada is speaking about again and again. What makes it different? As devotees, how can we best serve? And of course, this is a huge thing, but I want to look at it particularly from this question of humanitarian work, is how do we engage in humanitarian work as devotees, and what makes it different? The first, I think, is we have to start with ourselves, and we have to ask, am I Krishna conscious? Am I in a place where I have something to give? Because unless we have something to give, we can't give, right? Our heart has to have something in it. Our connection with Krishna, our practice of Krishna consciousness has to be of enough substance, maybe not of perfection, but of enough substance that we can have something to give, right? So we have to examine our own Krishna consciousness and say, how can I help? The second thing then, after we look at ourselves, is to look at the other and say, what does this person need? What do they actually need? Too often, this is a case not just with us, but with everyone in the world. Like too often people decide what another person's need is, they decide for them, and then impose it on them and say, this is what you need, right? And that doesn't help anyone. It's like if someone is looking for help with their children and we tell them the virtues of renunciation, who are we helping, right? They're not going to renounce. It may cause them some anguish to hear about renunciation, but they're not going to renounce, and certainly we haven't gotten any benefit from that. Perhaps it's better that we tell them how they can help their devotees be Krishna conscious and help their children grow up into smart and well-adjusted and devotee children, right? And that's where they're at, and that's the help that they need, right? So we need to ask ourselves, what does this person need? And find a way of giving it to them in such a way that they make progress towards Krishna, right? That it serves their immediate need and their ultimate. And so it's really it becomes crucial for us to then to really ask ourselves, where is this person at when we're trying to help them? I was thinking of the example of Narada Muni in Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, this is Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. Narada Muni travels around the world and he helps so many people, right, in different ways. And as he's helping people, if we look at his instructions, he's always teaching them exactly at the level that they're at. And he gives them instruction that they can appreciate, number one, and instruction that will push them a little bit beyond what they can appreciate, right? So it's not just making people feel that you're good and you're fine, but it's saying, this is what your need is, and this is how you can progress further. And sometimes that can mean very different things, right? When Narada Muni meets King Prachina Barhishat in Srimad Bhagavatam, Prachina Barhi is doing all these Vedic yagyas to sacrifice animals. And he tells him, he says, these animals that you are killing, they're going to kill you one day. You're going to get this karma, and you should stop sacrificing these animals. And the same Narada Muni, when he goes to meet Mrigari, the hunter, okay, the story is in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the first instruction that he gives Mrigari, okay, it's not the ultimate instruction, but it's the first instruction he gives him, is what? Kill the animals completely. Right? Mrigari was someone who was killing them, half killing them, giving them pain, and making them suffer much longer than they would if they were just killed right away. And so his first instruction was, kill them fully, right? Now, just think of it. Now, of course, he helps that Mrigadi progress beyond that. He helps him stop killing altogether. But imagine the initial instruction that he gives these two people is completely opposite. In the case of Prachina Barhi, here's a man who was doing animal sacrifice in a religious way, and he tells him to stop, don't kill animals. And Mrigadi, he tells him, kill the animals fully. The opposite instruction, because they were at opposite places, very different places in their spiritual progress. And as a result of helping them in that moment, at where they were at, he built trust with each one and was able to guide both of them to the ultimate perfection of pure devotional service. Because he built that relationship with Mrigadi, even someone who is a very difficult person for a sadhu to have a relationship with, and yet he was able to gain their trust. The second thing that he addresses with Mrigadi is Mrigadi's physical needs, his material needs. What's Mrigadi's first question? And this goes to my earlier point, that these two things are not separate, material and spiritual needs. What's Mrigadi's first question to Narada Muni? He says, okay, if I do what you say and I break my bow, who's going to feed my family? And Narada Muni, only when he's able to assure him that his job is not going to be lost, that he's not going to be unemployed and starving, only then is Mrigadi able to say, okay, I'm going to break this bow and take the life that you want me to live. Taking care of Mrigadi's material needs, or at least reassuring him of those needs, was something that came hand in hand with building him or helping him build his Krishna consciousness. So the first thing, we look at our own Krishna consciousness. The second thing is we look at what does this person need? And the third thing is we ask, okay, what can I give this person? What do I have to give? Every one of us, Krishna has given a certain platform that we can use materially to help others. Whether we're doctors or lawyers or teachers, whether we're pujaris or cooks or artists, each one of us has something, or mechanics. Each one of us, Krishna has given us something that is our skill, that is our asset, that is our ability to contribute. And if we can take that and we can say, look, like Bhagavatam says, this body is given to us by others. It's meant for the service of others. Well, how can I use this ability for the service of others? That becomes the perfection of whatever it is that Krishna has given us. And finally, and most importantly, we always ask ourselves in the process of helping is, how do I give Krishna alongside whatever else I'm giving? And how do I make sure that Krishna is always a part of this, that I see everything in relationship with Krishna, whether it's the plate of food I'm giving, whether it's the shelter that I'm giving, whatever it might be, the comfort, the psychological counseling, where's Krishna in this, right? How can I give Krishna? And sometimes it can be just as simple as being Krishna conscious ourselves. As I said in the first part of this series, people can recognize, they can see in a devotee's character that something is different. When they see someone who's a devotee, they know there's something unusual about this person. They have more to give than what they're displaying, right? They're giving me the ibuprofen, but I know they've got something else. It's like that man who comes to Sanatana Goswami asking for the stone, right? The Chintamani stone, or the and he gives it to him. He says, "This is what you want. Here, you're suffering, you're struggling in the material world." Sanatana Goswami says, "Here, take the philosopher's stone and be happy." But people recognize, at least those who are sensitive, those who are intelligent, those who are pious, they recognize, nah, there's something more that Sanatana Goswami is not giving me. What's that? Right? And when a person sees a devotee, when we are devotees and we enter the world and we do what seems like just normal activities that everyone else is doing, and we help in very normal ways, People know, no, this doctor is curing me of COVID-19 or whatever it is, but there's also something more that he or she can offer me. What is it, right? And just our presence as devotees, our demeanor, our actions, our words, we're able to give Krishna alongside with whatever we're doing. In this way, have an impact in the world, help people progress, not just materially, but spiritually. And in the process, help ourselves progress as well. So I want to conclude by hearkening back to this theme, right? That these two things are not different. We sometimes create a dichotomy between them within our own understanding, because we live in these bipolar worlds that materially and spiritually, we think that these two are different, but they're actually the same thing when we're actually being holistic in our Krishna consciousness. And so to that point, I think this is a nice way to conclude is this wonderful quotation by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which comes from his Tattva Sutra. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says, those who think that devotion to God and kindness to living entities are different to each other and act accordingly in their life will not be able to follow devotional culture. Their attempt is only a resemblance of devotion. All types of beneficence to others, like kindness, friendliness, forgiveness, charity, and respect, are included in devotion to God. Giving charity of medicine, clothes, food, and water are activities included in devotional culture. So anyway, I will stop there and see what questions or comments people have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, Radhika Raman Prabhu. So we have a question from Jayadvait Maharaj. Maybe I can request him if he can ask. Maharaj, I've just unmuted you. You can go ahead and ask your question if you like.
Well, thank you for the class. I have more questions than we have time for. But there's I have two things. First is, you said that it's important to help people physically. Are you saying it's important for ISKCON to do that? And if so, are you saying that? And if so, broadly speaking, how, apart from prasadam distribution, would you envision ISKCON doing this?
So thank you, Maharaj, for that question. My class was focused particularly on us as individuals, as individual devotees. That was the emphasis, the focus on the class. But since you bring up this point, I think definitely institutionally also is something that ISKCON can do. And in many ways is already doing. I mean, again, I think we end up doing it with some level of, we end up giving excuses for it, or we almost feel bad sometimes about it. But I think institutionally, we end up doing it already. And yes, there's the element of distribution of prasad, which was, so clearly and directly bringing together the physical and the spiritual in ways that Srila Prabhupada described. And we do that quite effectively in many parts of the world and during these present times, but also in not quite as expansive ways. I was thinking of the various ways so Bhaktivedanta Hospital, for example, which is an institutional manifestation of what many devotee doctors are doing around the world. And then I was also thinking of the ways in which our farm communities can demonstrate how the physical needs of humanity can be served best by a spiritual focus, by a spiritual perspective. And there's a few farm communities that have really taken some very wonderful steps in that direction and showed some of that effectiveness, although we've got a lot of work to do in that regard. So those are three areas that I was thinking of particularly, but perhaps there's others as well that I'm not thinking of.
Thank you. I'm facing a problem, a real life problem. The ISKCON has many charitable programs. Thousands and thousands of dollars are going for prasadam distribution, and especially a little bit for other things. I'm dealing with a case of a woman. She's a senior devotee. She's served for decades. She lives in Vrindavan, but she's a Dutch national. She has Alzheimer's and she's in a semi-advanced stage of dementia. Her government will, when COVID allows, will probably take her back to her home country, and they'll pay for her care. They'll give her, an institution to stay in, and food of some sort. And she'll be able to live out her life, with her physical needs taken care of. In that country, there are very few devotees, and essentially she'll have no prasadam, no kirtan, virtually no association of devotees. She'll just be taken care of. The ISKCON has no fund for taking care of such people. Her country is, ISKCON is very weak there. It has very few devotees and hardly any money. And I'm meeting with a group of devotees trying to figure out how we can best take care of her. If it were me, I'd say, well, hire some devotees who need a job, see to her loving care for the rest of her life, take advantage of whatever the government will give, but take care of her. She's in good health, apart from the Alzheimer's. She'll live for many years, and she'll be very expensive. She'll be very expensive. She's a very modest person. Her needs are modest, but to pay for round-the-clock care, which is what she'll need, will be costly. I might frame my question as who would like to help, if I wanted to be very pragmatic. Who among your listeners would like to take on this project or contribute to such a project? Or I might be more polemic and say, how, when we don't have the resources to see to our own members and their welfare, when we don't look after their own needs, people who've dedicated decades and decades and decades of their lives to the service of Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, how is it that we have the, that we can turn our vision outward and think about serving humanity and society in general terms, when society will look at us and see that we don't even take care of our own people?
Thank you, Maharaj. I'll speak particularly to your final point that you just made, and I think this is exactly this is exactly why it's so important that we do not separate the spiritual from the physical and the material. In the context of this COVID, was speaking about the broader society and the broader world. But these same principles and these same needs and objections that I've been speaking about apply to our care of devotees within our society as well. In other words, that as Prabhupada used to say, charity begins at home, right? Mm-hmm. And this same attitude of saying the physical is not important, therefore I'm not going to worry about it for myself or for others, leads us to devalue care for others' physical needs.
But who says that?
Both within and outside.
Who says that the physical doesn't matter? Who says that?
Oh, no, Maharaj, I'm saying from my own experience that we read again and again about how humanitarian work and care for others on the material physical level is not important. And so often when this question comes up in my conversations with devotees, then often the response is to say, well, we're engaged in the ultimate work, humanitarian work, as if that precludes us from taking care of this devotee, for example, that you're speaking of, whose our ultimate work is no doubt connected to caring for a devotee in her time of physical need. So it's that separation that I've experienced as a philosophical justification again and again that I'm speaking to. Maybe it's not others' experiences, but it has been my experience in this regard, which I feel is a misuse of our philosophical approach, is to try to split the two and say that as if our focus on the ultimate welfare work is somehow separated or divested from our care of persons who are suffering, whether they be within our society or outside our society. And no doubt, things like the hospice initiatives are so important for our tradition. I mean, the example you describe of the devotee is precisely why, as devotees, we have to feel impelled and moved to help people in their material and physical circumstances, because that is tied to our Krishna consciousness very closely.
Thank you.
I really don't see a separation between the internal within the society and outside the society. I 100% agree that charity begins at home, and everything I've said about this service to others and service to humanity, it must definitely start with taking care of devotees and taking care of ourselves and our own society and community.
Well, there's a lot more that I'd like to talk with you about. I think we should take that offline.
Okay.
If you and I can get an opportunity to speak offline, I think it would be helpful.
Sure, Maharaj. I'd be happy to. I'd be privileged.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Radhika, Raman Prabhu. I think that's pretty much all the time that we have for this evening. So we hope that you can join us sometime. We have this ongoing Zoom platform. And so what I'll do is in about a minute or so, I'll open up everyone's microphones, and you can unmute yourself if you want to say Hari Bol Radhika Raman Prabhu. So we've been doing that, and people appreciated that. Before that, I'm going to make some announcements about our upcoming sessions. So on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m., we have His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami Maharaj speaking from Towaco on the first canto in the lecture series. On Tuesday, May 12th, we have Her Grace Malati Devidasi on the topic of Don't Become a Glowworm, Gain Actual Protection. And on Thursday, we have a wonderful speaker, Ravindra Swarup Prabhu also, who will be coming on for the first time on our platform, and he'll be speaking on getting back to the basics of Krishna consciousness, how to become solidly engaged in Krishna consciousness, again, for those who have been practicing for many years. And then next Saturday, we have His Holiness Deamrita Swami, and on Sunday, His Grace Anuttama Prabhu. So please keep coming to this channel and the YouTube channel as well. And please take advantage of all these excellent speakers. So I would like to ask His Grace Neelmani Prabhu to offer a word of thanks. We have a lot of exalted guests as well. So Neelmani Prabhu, if you have a moment, go ahead.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, we can hear you, Prabhu. Go ahead.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much again, Radhika Raman Prabhu, for another wonderful session and a wonderful class, so nicely and neatly woven into the other two. Certainly, again, very, very thought-provoking and something we can all reflect on. As you were speaking, I was thinking about Prabhupada always challenging philanthropists by citing the story of the lady in the cage, or the bird in the cage, and the old lady always polishing the cage. I think you explained it very nicely, that you have to look after the cage as well as the bird, right? So anyway, thank you again so much. And I don't know, I was a little late joining, but I just wanted to announce to everybody that Prabhuji will be coming back on July 12th. So we're looking forward to that also. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really, I look forward to this association with so many friends and devotees I know from various parts of the country, and especially want to thank Nilamani Prabhu and Madan Gopal Prabhu for facilitating these classes. I know they provide a lot of sustenance to a lot of devotees in various parts of the world, actually. So my gratitude for this opportunity for association.
Thank you so much. And I also wanted to thank all the senior devotees who have joined. Of course, Holiness Jadvaita Swami is also here, but we also have other Srila Prabhupada disciples. And it's Mother's Day, and Radhika Raman Prabhu's mother is also here. I see Mother Ruddha Mataji, she's also here. We have Rukmini Mataji has joined us from Tirtha Prabhu. We had Shami Krishi Prabhu and Kaivalya Prabhu from Philadelphia area, and a number of others. So I want to thank him. My own mother is also joined. Mother Bhagavati is also joined. So thank you for joining. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. And we look forward to seeing you again. And thank you once again, Radhika Raman Prabhu, for this incredible lecture. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So go ahead and unmute yourself. You want to say Hare Bol?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Prabhu, thank you very much. Very well.
Nice to see you, Prabhu.
Thank you, very wonderful class. Wonderful class. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Yuta Radhika Raman Prabhu, தெரியாது?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Radhika Raman Prabhu. Arna?
Hare
Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Radhika Raman Prabhu, all glories, all glories. And
Yeah.
Maharaj and Radhika Raman Prabhu, if you wouldn't mind turning your conversation into a book for the rest of us, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Radhika Raman Prabhu, all glories, all glories. And Maharaj and Radhika Raman.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. Radhika Raman Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Jai Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Radhika Prabhu, Columbus. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Radhika Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Haribo.
Thank you. Such a wonderful class. Actually answered so many of my questions just in 1 hour and a half. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
From
for
North Carolina. New Goloka Temple.
Thank you.